Good evening. Welcome to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen meeting for Monday, June 22nd. Thank you for joining us on this cyber broadcast of our Board of Mayor and Aldermen meeting. This evening, our invocation will be led by City Administrator Patrick Lawton. Mr. Lawton.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the board. Precious Lord, please give us guidance in this meeting because a lack of guidance causes some nations to fall. But victory is won through many advisors. Lord, let us not be misguided in this meeting so that we do not produce bad decisions and ineffective results. I pray that you direct our steps so that this meeting can achieve your kingdom's aims. We place you at the center of this. Amen.
Thank you, Mr. Lawton, for the invocation this evening. I'll read into the record a statement regarding electronic meetings. All governing bodies in the state of Tennessee have been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Germantown is no exception. In an effort to carry out the governance and operational responsibilities lawfully and effectively, while also considering the protection of public health, safety, and welfare, the Germantown City Administration has taken steps to conduct Board of Mayor and Aldermen and other public meetings electronically. These actions were taken in response to Governor Bill Lee's Executive Order number 34 and Order extending Executive Order number 16, which suspended the requirements of the Tennessee Open Meetings Act to the extent necessary to allow governing bodies subject to that act to meet and conduct essential business by electronic means. Germantown Board of Mayor and Aldermen has determined that meeting electronically is necessary to protect the health, safety, and welfare of its citizens in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. Further notice of such electronic meetings has been and will continue to be published in the same manner as is currently used for regular meetings. The public is also and will continue to be able to view the agenda and have live access to the actual meetings by electronic means by logging into Germantown's webpage and by checking the appropriate link. Video recordings of the meeting will be made available as soon as practical after each meeting on the city's website at www.germantown-tn.gov. These measures are temporary and are due to expire on June 30th, 2020, unless further action is taken by Governor Lee. So with that read into the record, I would ask the clerk if we could establish a quorum this evening and call the roll of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. Clerk.
Alderman Sanders.
Here.
Alderman Gibson.
Here.
Alderman Massey.
Here.
Alderman Owens.
Here.
Alderman Yonda.
Here.
Thank you, Clerk. All 5 aldermen are present and attending this meeting this evening remotely. That takes us to item 4 on the agenda this evening, setting and adopting the agenda. The agenda was presented to the public earlier this week and consists of many items on the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as presented to the public?
Move to approve.
It's a motion by Alderman Gibson. Is there a second?
I'll second.
There is a second by Vice Mayor Yonda. Please call the roll.
I have a procedural question, Mayor.
Sure. Go right ahead, Alderman Sanders.
I did have a couple of questions on 2 of the items. Since we didn't have an executive session, would that be permitted prior to the vote? Some discussion on this agenda, or should I move to take those 2 items and put them on the regular agenda?
You can make that motion to amend any of the items on the preliminary agenda. Would you like to do so at this time?
Sure, thank you. I would like to move that we remove item E and F and place that on the regular agenda, please, for some discussion.
It has been brought forth in a motion to move item E, contract electrostatic disinfectant spraying services, and item F, participation and agreement opioid class action lawsuit. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second on the amendment. Without objection, we can add those. Any objection? So moved. We'll add item E and F to the regular agenda. Those will be items 14 and 15. If you could make note of that. And it was originally brought forward and with the motion to adopt the agenda and properly seconded. Yes, Alderman Yonda.
Would this be the time for me to ask if we can move some regular over to the preliminary?
But why, certainly.
I think 8, 9, 10, and 11 are pretty mundane. Mundane. Must be from Monroe, Louisiana. I would like to suggest that we move those over to the preliminary.
Could you repeat the numbers again, please?
8, 9, 10, and 11.
It has been brought forward in an amendment by Vice Mayor Yonda to move items 8, 9, 10, and 11 to the preliminary agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
They're brought forth by the Vice Mayor and seconded by Alderman Gibson. Without objection, we'll move those items. Hearing none, they'll be moved as well. Those items will be items, give me a moment, please. We will make those items, keeping in mind, instead of trying to redirect E and F, we'll make those items J, K, L, and M. Item 8 is yes, correct, J. Item 9, K. Item 10, L, and item 11, M. Clerk, do you have that?
And Mayor, I have another suggestion. The opioid one, I think we're all kind of interested in that one. I think we have someone here from the legal.
Well, that one has been brought forward without objection. It will be item.
Can we move it up?
That one.
Can we move it
Excuse
up?
me?
Can we move it up to one of the first things we talk about on the regular?
Without objection, that'll be fine. We can make that 8A.
Okay, thank you.
We can make that 8A. And again, that was item, let me check that, please. That was item F.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Good recommendation, suggestion.
Mayor, this is
Yeah.
Alderman Owens here. As the board knows, my mother resides at the village, and normally I would not impact my vote, but she did write a letter of support for the item that is on the agenda this evening, and therefore I feel like it is best for me to abstain on this item. And so I believe I'll just abstain on the entire consent agenda, if that will make it easier for everyone.
That's fine. Let the record reflect what Alderman Owens stated. Thank you. It has been properly moved and seconded on and also brought forward 2 amendments without objection. Please call the roll, clerk.
Alderman Sanders,
Yes.
Alderman Gibson,
Yes.
Alderman Massey,
Yes.
Alderman Owens,
Abstain.
Alderman Yonda.
Yes.
The agenda has been set and adopted for this evening's meeting. That takes us to item 5 on the agenda, approval of the minutes from the regularly scheduled meeting from June the 8th. Those minutes were presented to the public Wednesday. I noticed no additions or modifications or corrections. Does any other board member have anything that they would like to correct from those minutes? Is there a motion to approve the minutes as presented?
Move to approve.
Motion.
Second.
So motion by Vice Mayor Yonda, seconded by Alderman Gibson. Please
Thank
call
you.
the roll.
Alderman Gibson,
Yes.
Alderman Massey,
Yes.
Alderman Owens,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Yonda,
Yes.
Alderman Sanders.
Yes.
Thank you, board. The minutes from the meeting held on June 8th, 2020 have been approved. That brings us to item 6 on the agenda this evening, Citizens to be Heard. Citizens to be Heard has a dedicated email that goes live when the packet is distributed to the public and has, I think, a 500-word cap on it with a deadline of noon on the day of the Board of Mayor and Alderman meeting. Were there any citizens to be heard this week? Clerk Betty.
Yes, Mayor, 8 citizens came forward. They were all in support of the Germantown Education Foundation funding request that's on tonight's agenda.
Thank you, Clerk. Thank you for your report, and we appreciate those citizens that submitted information to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. That brings us to item 7 on the agenda, the preliminary agenda. I will read those into the record, and remember, we did make some adjustments and some modifications, so bear with me as I make my way through that. Item 7A, appointments to the Germantown Education Commission. The Germantown Education Commission and the Library Board run from a June to June year. Other boards and commissions run from January to December. I would ask at this time, Alderman Gibson, do you have a recommendation for chair of the Education Commission?
I do, Mayor. I would recommend retaining Natalie Williams as chair.
Very good. I concur with you. Item B, appointments to the Library Board. The Library Board elects its own chair. The mayor does not appoint that chair. Item C on the agenda, change orders number 2 and 3, motor replacement for well number 6 and cleaning and repair of well number 7 at the Southern Avenue well field. Item D, civic support, Germantown Education Foundation. Item E was pulled from the preliminary agenda and will be presented as item 14 this evening. Item F was pulled as well, participation in agreement opioid class action lawsuit, and that will be presented this evening as item 8A. That takes us to item G on the preliminary agenda, purchase court software annual subscription fees. Item H, reimbursement enterprise upgrade for public safety computer aided dispatch projects. Item J, resolution 20R05, a cooperative agreement on the use of the Acela software system with Memphis and Shelby County Division of Planning and Development. Item J on the preliminary agenda is development contract number 1231 and final site plan approval 7554 Neshoba Road, new cell tower. Item K on the preliminary agenda is development contract number 1234, the Village at Germantown parking lot or parking expansion. Item L on the preliminary agenda is professional service agreement, Poplar Culverts Replacement Project Phase 5. And item M on the preliminary agenda, professional services agreement, traffic signal at Wolf River Boulevard and Houston High School. Is there a motion to accept the preliminary agenda as modified?
Move to approve.
There's a motion by Vice Mayor Yonda. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second by Alderman Gibson. Please call the roll.
Alderman Massey,
Abstain.
Alderman Owens,
Abstain.
Vice Mayor Yonda,
Yes.
Alderman Sanders,
Yes.
Alderman Gibson.
Yes.
The preliminary agenda has been approved as modified this evening. That brings us to item 8A on the agenda this evening, as mentioned earlier. That agenda item is formerly the item 7F, participation and agreement on the opioid class action lawsuit. I'll turn this over to either Mr. Lawton or Mr. McCarroll, who will be making this presentation before making any introductions.
Mayor, I'll make the presentation.
Go right ahead.
Thank you. This agenda item requests board authorization for the city of Germantown to participate in a nationwide class action lawsuit against opioid manufacturers and drug distributors across the country. It also requests authorization to engage the law firm of Friedman DeZazio to assist the city in pursuing damages incurred as a result of the illegal sale, distribution, and marketing of opioids within our community. As explained in your agenda sheet, material, the city provides medical services to individuals, excuse me, to individuals who suffer from drug addiction, and in some cases experience overdoses as a result of this type of use and other drugs with similar effects on the body. Like thousands of communities across the country who are participating in this lawsuit, the city of Germantown incurs personnel training and increasing medical expenses to respond to these type of medical emergencies when we are called upon to do so. By joining this class action lawsuit, the city would be able to participate in any future financial settlement arrangements. There are no legal fees, costs, or expenses pertaining to the lawsuit unless the city is compensated through a judgment or settlement. Information regarding a Chapter 11 bankruptcy filing by Purdue Pharma, the maker of OxyContin, is included within your agenda material. With your approval of these items this evening, the city would be included as part of any future settlement agreements with this major manufacturer. Matt Kahn, an attorney with Friedman DeSazio, is available this evening if you have any questions. We had talked with Mac McCarroll and David Harris about this and the city's ability to join this lawsuit. We were advised by Mac and David both that there is a conflict with Burke, Porter & Johnson representing us. However, there are firms, expert firms in the country who are working with communities like Germantown to try to receive funds through these various settlements. And that's where Mr. Kahn comes in. Matt is an attorney out of Birmingham with a law firm I mentioned. And Matt is on the line. If the board has any questions of him or the process or the city's involvement, myself or Mr. Kahn, and Mac, if you can jump in, please try to do so. And Jason Heisman worked extensively on this agenda material as well, and I believe he's on the call as well. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Lawton. As per normal, let's go ahead and get a motion on the table. Welcome to this meeting, Mr. Kahn. If called upon, we'll let you know here in a moment. Is there a motion to approve the city's participation in a nationwide opioid class action lawsuit and engage in services of Friedman DeSazio to pursue damages incurred as a result of the illegal sale, distribution, and marketing of opioids and opioid derivative drugs within the city? Is there a motion?
I will move to approve.
There's a motion by Vice Mayor Yonda. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second by Alderman Owens. Vice Mayor, would you like the floor at this time?
Yes, please.
Go right ahead.
Mr. McCarroll, actually, there's actually no expenses to us. This is in the event that this law firm is successful and there is a payment. Only cost we have is a share of our benefit. Is that correct?
There may also be incidental costs. I would have to ask Mr. Kahn.
Yeah, this is Matt. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, Mr. Kahn.
Yeah, there would, if any expenses of litigation are paid up front by our firm, and you will never pay us anything. The only way that we get paid is if we get you paid. So, if there's a judgment or settlement, any expenses or our fee will come out of that. So there will never be an out-of-pocket cost to the city of Germantown.
Okay, thank you very much. That's all I had, Mayor.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. And let's see, Alderman Owens, would you like the floor at this time, sir?
Actually, I'll defer to Alderman Sanders. I know he had a couple of questions about this.
Sure. The floor is open for discussion.
Yes, Mayor, I have a couple of questions.
Go ahead, Alderman Sanders. You're recognized.
Over the years, Mayor, just with speaking with our fire department and also during regular budget processes, et cetera, it's been my understanding that most of our citizens in Germantown have insurance that cover our ambulance calls, and we don't lose much, if any, when we make calls for folks that don't have insurance. So what kind of damages would we have if we've already collected from an insurance company to make an ambulance call, for instance?
Thank you. I will turn to Chief Selberg. Chief Selberg, can you respond to that question?
Yes, sir. As y'all all know, our costs exceed what we normally charge for ambulance service. So the city does bear some of the costs for those transports. And the cost is basically set on a basic scale, depending on the type of call. On these type of calls, our costs are often much higher, partially due to the extensive cost for the drug, the Narcan. So we do incur additional costs and then also personnel costs on these type of calls.
And I would add, Mayor and Board, that, I'm sorry, Mayor,
Go ahead.
I think that the purpose of the lawsuit, and Matt can expand on this further, is the way these drugs were marketed and presented to the community, not only in Germantown, but across the country. And I believe, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, these calls for services are also seen as unnecessary calls that taxpayer dollars for a drug that perhaps should not have operated in this way. Would you expand on that, Matt?
Go ahead, Mr. Cohen.
Yes, I will. And a lot of, there's a lot of things you can point to as direct costs of this epidemic, like the Narcan and your time that you have to spend on this. I think you could ask the fire department or police department. They would say they spend, time and taxpayer dollars on this. But the lawsuit is also about abating this public nuisance. So as far as damages go, we have asked for, past, present, and future damages for any expenses that are incurred or are going to be incurred, but also damages to help abate this crisis. And how abatement is going to be conducted would be up to the cities and counties and the state to determine at that time. But there are a lot of indirect costs to the city as well that people don't really think of. As in, if you have any opioid deaths, that's a taxpayer, and that's taken away from your tax base as well. So there's a lot of indirect costs as well as direct costs that we are trying to recover from these defendants who really not only started this crisis, but fueled the crisis as well. So even like the fire chief said, they've got all these other costs that the taxpayers are paying for, but there are a lot of indirect costs as well that may be hidden behind the scenes that we're trying to recover as well.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. You still have the floor, Alderman Sanders.
Thank you. I did ask last week and heard back from Mr. Heisman. We don't have real solid numbers according to what I was told on what our cost might have been, but it was indicated to me that we may have 30 to 50 calls a year related to drugs, not necessarily opioids. So I just had questions about what our true, damages might be. So I guess I would ask, if a settlement was reached in this lawsuit, would cities be responsible for providing hard numbers and data to show what each city's impact is? And would the settlements or awards be based on that information that's provided?
Mr. Cohen?
Yeah, I can take that. Like a good lawyer, I'll tell you the answer is yes and no. But if we were taking the city of Germantown's case to trial, you would have to. The defendants would make you parse all that out and prove all that. However, what's going to happen in a large multi-district litigation such as this is they're working on damage models now. And these damage models in a case like this always assume that smaller cities and counties are not going to be able to prove these types of damages, down in the numbers. You've got $1 million budget for the police. How much of that budget went to the opioid crisis? A city like Germantown is not going to be able to figure that out. So there's going to be a damage model put together. There have been a couple floated already. And in those damage models, you don't have to go in and parse out, what was caused by the opioid crisis and what wasn't. They use economists, accountants, and some other experts to figure out more like the law of averages. And so they look at budgets. They look at how many opioid pills went to your town, which can be pulled from the ARCOS database, this federal database. They look at opioid or drug-related deaths in your city and your county. And they've come up with basically a formula at this time. And the formula is pretty convoluted, and we don't know if the appellate courts are actually going to accept it, but there will be some sort of damage model that will be similar to the one that has already been floated, if not the one that has already gone to the appellate courts. But to answer your question shortly, you're not going to have to do that. That's going to be done by economists and lawyers and experts that will figure that out for you.
Thank you, Mr. Cohn. That concludes your time on the floor. Alderman Sanders, further discussion?
Yes, Mayor.
Yes, go ahead, Alderman Massey.
How much time has the city spent compiling information for the plaintiff's attorneys so far?
I would defer that to Mr. Lawton or Mr. Heisman.
Only in conversations, a meeting, a phone call I had with David Harris, conversation with Mac, and then a phone call with Mr. Kahn. We have not provided information. We've not gone through and dug for that based upon the explanation that Matt provided in terms of how those settlement agreements would be reached.
Thank you, Mr. Lawton. Continue, Alderman Sanders.
This is Alderman Massey right now, Mayor.
Oh, I'm sorry, Alderman Massey. My apologies. Go ahead.
No problem. Mayor, how much time does Matt anticipate the city will need going forward to compile information for him, if any? And has Matt received any information from the city today?
Thank you, Alderman. Mr. Cohn, do you have any answers for that, or able to formulate an answer?
Yes, I can. We thus far it's just been communications. I've talked to Jason and Patrick about the case, and David Harris, just explaining our role and the city's role in it. And what we'll have to do is mostly the work is going to be on our end, my firm. There's a lot of stuff we can pull online and things that we can get. There is one. After we get the complaint filed, we have to file what's called a plaintiff fact sheet with the court within 90 days. Those plaintiff fact sheets, on average, have taken about an hour to 2 hours of the city's time. What we do is we compile a lot of the information here, and then we put the plaintiff fact sheet together ourselves. So it doesn't take 2 hours. It takes a lot longer than that, but our law firm handles most of the work. So I would say less than 2 hours to pull the stuff together. 15 minutes of a police chief or fire chief's time, and probably an hour from the city manager or someone who's knowledgeable that can get us the stuff that we need. So yeah, I'd say less than 2 hours of time.
Thank you, Mr. Cohn. Go ahead, continue, Alderman Massey.
I think that's all the questions that I have.
Thank you, Alderman Massey. Further discussion? Anybody else would like to speak before a second turn goes around? Alderman Sanders, would you like the floor?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah.
I did read the complaint for the city of Clarksville. Of course, they're 3 times larger than Germantown is. So that was part of the reason I asked about how settlements might be structured, because I do see some of the information that they might have expenses for, say Germantown may not. I don't know if we would have counseling costs or programs for addiction, for instance. I think that'd probably be a county health department issue or some other entity. Addiction and treatment, I'm not sure that we would have that. Most of our criminal prosecution expenses would occur at the DA's level and downtown at general sessions or criminal court. I think we do have preliminary court proceedings as we normally would. Some jail expense, I say we only temporarily house folks there before they're transferred downtown. So that's one of the reasons I was curious what damages we thought we had that justified our joining in the lawsuit, Mayor. I'm not a fan of just joining in lawsuits in the hopes of we get something out of it, because in the end, lawsuits cost the consumer, and so that's going to cost our taxpayer down the road. So that's just some comments I wanted to make, and I think that's all I have.
Thank you, Alderman Sanders. Any further discussion?
Mayor, I think I
Alderman Massey. Go ahead, Alderman Massey, you have the floor.
If the plaintiff's attorney could expound on some of Alderman Sanders' concerns, I would appreciate that. What are the projected costs, not only to taxpayers, but also to people who have surgeries and rely on some of these drugs for their pain treatments after surgery? So, what my concern is, one, the cost, the potential cost to the city to compile the information in comparison to the recovery. Then, two, the ultimate impact on people who truly need some pain relief that some of these opioids offer. I mean, no doubt that some of these are abused, and none of us on this board, want that, and we'll do everything we can to stop it and punish people involved in any wrongdoing related to the abuse of opioids. But, at the same time, what are we accomplishing with the lawsuit, and what are the consequences of us joining this? I mean, how are our taxpayers going to be impacted, and how are those people that rely on these opioids for pain treatment going to be impacted?
Yeah.
Thank you, Alderman Massey. Mr. Cohn, if you would like to take a stab at that. There was a lot of statement and some questions in there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I know where you're getting at as well with this. And, whether or not Germantown gets, joins this lawsuit or not, there's going to be opioid reform, and it's already begun on the federal level and a little bit, on the state level. That there's already been 2 separate decrees in the multi-district litigation in Ohio where they have had a lot of, and it would take a long time to go over it, but they've had a lot of opioid reform that has already been agreed to by the opioid manufacturers and plaintiff counsel to try to slow down this epidemic that has ravaged the country. And as far as the cost to the taxpayer, if there are not going to be any cost to the taxpayer. And the way that we see this is that every city and county in America, that has been affected by this opioid epidemic, and every single city and county in America has a duty to do something to get the taxpayers' money back that has already been spent on this epidemic, and that will be spent in the future. And not only that, is to abate the crisis, which is key. And whether there's an addiction treatment facility, that is in Germantown, that might, it might not happen that way, but on the county level, they may have some addiction treatment facilities and other things like that to abate this crisis. How to abate the crisis, I don't think anybody on this call knows how, but not the lawyers or anybody else, but they're going to, that's what we're trying to figure out. And we don't want the taxpayers to have to pay for that. We want the defendants who started this and fueled this fire to have to pay for this. Another thing that I don't know if this was a question or not, but one other thing to keep in mind is a lot of these manufacturers have filed bankruptcy. So they're going out of business, and you have to file what's called a proof of claim in the bankruptcy case, or else you lose your claim forever. The Purdue Pharma, who is one of the worst actors in fueling this opioid epidemic, has just gone bankrupt. And if you don't get your claim filed by July 30th, then you're never going to be able to file a claim in that bankruptcy. So that's just one of those things that you've got to act, or else all your neighbors, all the other cities and counties are going to share in this bankruptcy distribution, and Germantown wouldn't. But as far as the money coming out of the taxpayers' pockets, it's the exact opposite.
Thank you, Mr. Cohn. And that concludes your time on the floor. Alderman Massey, any further discussion on this particular item? I had a question for Chief quickly. The Chief, and I know you can't speak for police, but it's my understanding that from fire, ambulance, and police, there's an extensive amount of training that goes along with how to handle these type of calls. Also, the Narcan is, I guess it's something that we have to supply for all of our first responders as well. Is that accurate, all the training that's associated with overdose calls of that nature, Chief?
Yes, sir. Obviously, we have a lot of training that we go through with at our EMT level and paramedic level for the use of the Narcan. We're the only ones that actually carry it. Our police don't carry it because we're there quickly to support them on it. So they may have to take other actions prior to our arrival and then assist us with it.
Great. And it would be my hope that if this particular item does pass this evening, that if there are proceeds, that we would call upon city administration and police and fire to come up with an educational program to use those funds with our friends at GMSD. Many on this call tonight or in this meeting tonight have had friends' children that have overdosed and have succumbed to this awful crisis in this country. And without naming those people, there are quite a few in this community. So with that said, please call the roll.
Alderman Owens,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Yonda,
Yes.
Alderman Sanders,
Yes.
Alderman Gibson,
Yes.
Alderman Massey.
Yes.
Thank you, board. We appreciate your support in this. Mr. Khan, we appreciate you working with us, and you're welcome to stay with us for the rest of the night, but you won't be billing us, trust me.
See, that's the good thing. I'm working on contingency fee. I don't have to bill you guys.
Well, good. We know how attorneys work, so we'll let you enjoy your dinner tonight. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, guys. And if you ever have any questions, just you can look me up and call me, and I can answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That takes us to item 8. Now, excuse me. Let me go ahead and make sure I get this right here. That takes us to
Electrostatic.
That's right. Thank you so much. Yeah, that was 8B. So I'm sorry. Actually, that was E. So 8, 9, 10, and 11 were placed on the preliminary agenda. That brings us to item 12 on the agenda this evening. That's ordinance number 2020-2, year-end budget adjustments, third and final reading. Mr. Lawton, Director Royals, am I correct in the lineup? Is that what's next? Or Clerk
Yes.
Betty? Good, thank you. That was difficult for me.
Yes, sir.
Director Royals, go ahead. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. The purpose of this agenda item is to approve ordinance 2020-2 on third and final reading. At the end of the fiscal year, a number of year-end budget adjustments are needed in order to avoid budget and fund overruns. I will go over the budget adjustments. I will just mention briefly the ones that we have previously gone over and then go over in more detail the new items. All right, 20-108 deals with the ambulance fund. 20-129 dealt with the pension fund. 20-147 dealt with the fire fund. And then going forward are the new items for this evening. 20-128 deals with administration. We are asking for an additional $189,387 for increased legal fee costs. 20-130 has to do with the PEG PEG funds, the GMSD. We actually brought those through the fiscal year, but we wait till the end of the year to actually true up with a budget adjustment. When we bring the agenda item to the board, we do not bring a budget adjustment with that agenda item, and we wait to the end of the year. So this number will match with the previous agenda items that went with the PEG funding. And finally, 20-122. If the alderman will recall, last year we had $1 million associated for the Riverdale rooftop units, $500,000 for the security improvements, and $200,000 for the field house. These payments were not actually requested and made in the fiscal year of FY19. The $1 million rooftop and the $500,000 security was requested for and paid in FY20 in July, and the field house was requested and paid for in August. Because we did not actually expend the funds in FY19, we did not make the transfer from the general fund into Fund 38. Fund 38 is the fund that the city transfers the capital expense to the school fund. And so we are just truing up the transfer to the correct fiscal year. I am happy to take any questions that you have.
Thank you, Director Royals, for your presentation this evening. Is there a motion to approve ordinance number 2020-2 for year-end budget adjustments on third and final reading? Is there a motion?
Move to approve, Mayor.
There's a motion made by the Vice Mayor. Is there a second?
Second.
There is a second. Was that by Alderman Owens?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Second by Alderman Owens. Vice Mayor, would you like the floor at this time?
Yes, I just want to make sure, Chief Selberg, is he still with us?
Yes, sir. So, Chief, if you could be at the ready.
Be at the ready. We're still talking about the ambulance service costs on this $125,000. There's no fire costs in there. That's just all ambulance. Is that correct?
In that adjustment, yes, sir.
Okay. So we are proposed that we ended up with 925, even though our budget was 800,000. So we're not getting a lot of things covered totally, I guess, as far as our expenses going. Is that correct?
Chief?
Yes, sir. We are experiencing some shortage in revenue due to a reduction in calls in April and May, primarily related to the COVID. So we are seeing that. We have been doing some additional evaluation of some other revenue coming in, some CARES Act funding, the kicker payments from Medicare, some of those. So we're optimistic that we won't actually be needing that much funds, but we're not sure at this time till we basically reconcile in a couple months.
Okay, thank you, Chief. The other question I have is the PEG disbursement. This total amount for the 4 quarters is $161,880. Ms. Royals?
That's correct.
Okay, so do we request, and you know this has been an issue with me in the past, do we request their capital expenditure information on this? Because that's all supposed to go towards capital expenditure at GMSD. Do you make that request?
Director?
Honestly, I'm not totally sure. Patrick, do you know?
Yes, we do. We have that, Alderman Yonda.
Okay.
I believe Mr. Fisher may have requested that, but we do have that specifically as we're going into the FY21 budget, how those dollars will be used and how they were used in the end of this fiscal year.
Okay, thank you very much.
We'll be glad to put those in the alderman's boxes. If staff could make a note of that, we can make sure to do that. Alderman Owens, would you like the floor at this time?
No, I was just going to ask for that same thing. If you could just provide us that information, that would be great.
Sure you would. Thank you. The floor is open.
I have a couple of questions, Mayor.
Go ahead, Alderman Sanders.
I know it's normal practice that after, towards the end, we continue to add adjustments here, but I don't know who could answer or if it is actually found anywhere, but it seems a little unfair to the public that we add items after our public hearing. Is there any reason why we could not have put all these budget adjustments in on the second reading when we had the public hearing?
Very fair question. Mr.
Oh,
Lawton or Director?
Oftentimes it's, and Adrian, correct me if I'm wrong, oftentimes it's because we are still incurring expenses and we don't know what those monthly expenses look like when we start this process. And so as we get closer to the end of the fiscal year, we know pretty much how we're going to end in the hole, if you will, in a number of these departments. That's the reason why they build on each other, because of there's still expenditures happening and we don't really know what that looks like till the end of the fiscal year.
Thank you. So you wouldn't make a change in reading, first reading to third reading, you'd just be there. It's done at the end. Alderman Sanders.
Okay, and do we expect any other adjustments? Because I apologize, I was out of town last week on vacation, but right before 5 o'clock, I realized we had an item in January, a $58,000 expenditure for a fluoride system out of the utility fund, and the agenda item at that time said we would have a year-end budget adjustment on that, and I don't see that here. So will that come at a later time?
Director?
No, sir, it will not. We had funds left over that we were able to move with an internal budget adjustment.
Okay, so that's just an internal transfer, and we don't need any form, one of these requests for transfer or appropriation then?
That's correct. We're not asking for additional funds, which goes to the board. We just did an internal budget adjustment that just requires the city administrator and the mayor.
Okay. On the item you indicated for the schools, I believe that's 20-122. Did we end up transferring the full amount that was approved in the budget for the schools to the schools, or is this a different number? I don't have.
No, so excuse me. So when they requested the item, we transferred the money to them, and then which was the actual expense occurred in FY20. So we held the transfer in FY19 to align the transfer with the actual expense. And now we're going to move and transfer the money this year to align with the actuals. But they did receive the full amount.
Thank you. And one last question is on the ambulance fund transfer again. I see you're putting $85,000 over into fund balance for them. And I think I looked at the CAFR. It seemed like they had a healthy fund balance already. Don't quote me, but I believe it's $160,000 at the end of last year. So why are we building this fund balance in the ambulance fund?
Chief or Director?
I'm happy to answer that.
Go ahead.
So you're right, Alderman. That was the cushion that we had talked about earlier. As we start these readings in May, and as we go through the fiscal year, getting towards the year end, we will see how the fund and the revenues that come in. And if we don't have to transfer the full amount, we will not. That was the extra just in case, as the chief talked about, if the revenues, when we get to the very end and we true up the revenues, if we don't have enough, we'll budget the full amount. However, if it looks like that we will have enough, then we won't send over the full transfer. And that is that portion of it.
The $85,000?
Yes, sir.
Okay, because I believe we treat that as a revenue fund. So if we did transfer that over there, we cannot transfer it back out, is my understanding, right?
But we can pull down the transfer next year. So let's say we did transfer more than we needed, then in FY22, we would transfer less and pull the fund balance down.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion?
Mayor, I do have a quick
Alderman
question.
Masting.
Can you talk about the amendment for the legal fees, please?
Sure, I'll be happy to do that. We've spent probably year to date just over maybe $420,000 overall, and most of that's come out of the administration's budget. We had a budget of $200,000. We went over on Birch, Porter and Johnson's billing by approximately $27,000, and that's estimating the month of June. However, $146,000 of that overrun comes in a number of areas. It comes in the form of the lawsuit with the Jack Owens Revocable Trust. And that's an amount of $13,900. It comes in PB&J, Birch Partner Johnson, processing TRPA and Freedom of Information Act requests. That's close to $50,000. We had some legal expenses and litigation associated with the Watermark lawsuit. And then we incurred about $85,000 in attorney fees from Harris Shelton, primarily because the TML, public entity partners, will provide the city with a defense up to a point and cover those dollars. I believe it's $100,000. Well, we exceeded that. And when we exceeded that, the city, through the legal line in administration, we need to pay those litigation costs to Harris Shelton because our insurance company, Public Entity Partners, is no longer covering the cost for those. So it's a combination of those things. Yes, we did go over. We had $200,000 budgeted for Birch Partner Johnson for legal matters, but we went over another $146,000 in other legal items. June is an estimate because we have not received the billing for June yet. So we did include additional dollars in June's payment, but that's the reason for the overrun. Those reasons are why we have the overrun.
Thank you, Mr. Lawton. Mr. Massey, you still have the floor.
I remember we voted to change the fee structure for the city attorneys with the goal being to reduce the cost. But it looks like that our costs are increasing. Has anyone looked at the agreement to determine whether or not we saved any money as a result of that change to the fee structure? What was the impact?
Mr. Lawton? You're on mute, Mr. Lawton.
I did just the opposite. I went from on to mute. Apologize. Yeah, I would have to compare the expenses last year in FY19 to how we ended in 20, and I have not done that. I'm not prepared to address that. But we did exceed what we had budgeted in FY20 in just pure Birch Porter and Johnson bills for general matters. It was the other areas where we involve the firm that are beyond the general matters for litigation that we exceeded. Another area where we exceeded as well with dealing with COVID-19. I know in addition to other work that City Attorney McCarroll was involved with, we also had a number of expenses and just time, not expenses, but legal fees and time related to dealing with all the COVID issues that came our way rather hot and heavy and pretty quickly. And I know Mr. McCarroll has been working and still works with attorneys around the county as we look at the back to business plans, as we look at putting in place the health department directives, and as we look at making sure we're in compliance with everything that comes down from Governor Lee's office and what we put out here as well in terms of emergency declarations.
Thank you, Mr. Lawton. Further questions? Any other further discussion on this particular item? Please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Yonda,
Yes.
Alderman Sanders,
Yes.
Alderman Gibson,
Yes.
Alderman Massey,
No.
Alderman Owens,
Yes.
Ordinance 2020-2, year-end budget adjustments, third and final reading passes. We appreciate the support of the board. Director Royals, I will point out, if you could share with your staff, only 6 entries this year. I think that might be a record in my 16 years. So we appreciate that. At times, they are many pages in length. And as we're about to look at the next item, I think there are probably over 200 entries that the school district has. That takes us to item 13 on the agenda. Ordinance number 2020-4, Germantown Municipal School District year-end budget adjustments, third and final reading. Director Royals, would you be making this presentation tonight? Go ahead.
Yes, I will. All right. The purpose of this agenda item is to approve ordinance number 2020-4 on third and final reading. At the end of the fiscal year, a number of year-end budget adjustments are needed and required to avoid budget and fund overruns as well. I would like to add that all of these budget adjustments have been approved by their administration and by their board. I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Director, for the presentation. Is there a motion to approve ordinance number 2020-4 for Germantown Municipal School District year-end budget adjustments on third and final reading? Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
There's a motion by Alderman Gibson. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by, I'm sorry, I didn't catch who did that.
Alderman
Was that Alderman
Sanders?
Sanders? Thank you, Alderman
Yes.
Sanders. Alderman Gibson, would you like the floor at this time?
No, sir, not at this time.
Alderman Sanders, would you like the floor?
No, thank you.
The floor is open for discussion. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Alderman Sanders,
Yes.
Alderman Gibson,
Yes.
Alderman Massey,
Yes.
Alderman Owens,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Yonda.
Yes.
The measure carries and passes. And on third and final reading, ordinance 2020-4, Germantown Municipal School District year-end budget adjustments carries. That takes us to item 14 on the agenda this evening, which was prior item 7E, contract electrostatic disinfectant spraying services. If you want to turn to item F back in the preliminary, Mr. Lawton, will you be making this presentation?
Yes, Mayor, I will.
Go ahead. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the board. When the COVID crisis hit, very quickly, the city of Germantown was trying to determine what is the best way that we can keep surfaces clean for not only our employees, but also for the general public. We discovered that electrostatic spraying equipment was probably the most efficient way to do that in addition to just general hour by hour cleaning of these surfaces. We ordered electrostatic spraying equipment in the month of April, and that's identified in your agenda sheet under background. But the arrival date of this equipment has been pushed back and pushed back and pushed back, and now it looks like it may not be here until the month of August. So we sought bids to provide the city with that type of services. And so this agenda item before the board authorizes to contract with master building services contractors to provide electrostatic disinfectant spraying services within city buildings and on an as-needed basis. We advertised and received 8 qualifying bids. The agreement with master building services contractor establishes a price at 8 cents per square foot when we use them. If their services are used, the city's regular procurement procedures and approval thresholds will be followed, and a cost for these services will be allocated to the various specific departments where the service is being provided on an allocation basis. We will also seek reimbursement for this funding through the federal funding source through the CARES Act. We have approximately $1.2 million at this point that we'll be bringing forward to the board in July in CARES Act funding. And we are currently identifying COVID-related cases or COVID-related expenditures, and this could very well be one of those. Mayor, the administration recommends approval. I'm available for questions. I know Mr. Douglas is on the line. He's worked on this, as well as Ms. Piefer as well. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Lawton. Is there a motion to approve an electrostatic disinfectant spraying agreement with Master Building Service Contractors, MBSC, to provide services within city buildings on an as-needed basis at a price of 0.08 cents per square foot for a successive 12-month period? Is there a motion?
So moved.
It's a motion by Alderman Sanders.
Second.
Second by Vice Mayor Yonda. Alderman Sanders, would you like the floor, sir?
Yes, please. I just had a few questions. One was answered in the presentation, but my main question that I wanted to ask was, once we receive the electrostatic sprayers that the city has ordered, do we intend to do this disinfecting ourselves and discontinue the use of this service?
Let Ms. Piefer or Douglas, would you like to jump in? Sorry, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor and Patrick and the board. Yeah, this is rental. Our intent is to do the disinfecting in-house with our staff. But if we get behind and cannot keep up for whatever reason, we would at least have this contract service in place to give us some help if we need it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Go ahead, Alderman.
And I assume we want to go ahead and start using them prior to our sprayers and foggers being received. Is that correct?
On an as-needed basis, yes. Right now, we've started court services again, so we definitely want to disinfect after court services each Wednesday night or first thing on Thursday mornings.
Thank you. That's all I had, Mayor.
Thank you, Alderman. Further discussion?
Mayor, I have a question.
Alderman Massey, you have the floor, sir. Go ahead.
So how were the bid specs formulated and who worked on the project as far as deciding what was going to be required of the contract?
Thank you. Director Douglas or Director Piefer, would you like to take a run at that?
Thank you, Mayor. I work closely with procurement, and they did a lot of research to find out which product and equipment work best to kill the COVID virus. And we actually have, or the city does not own one, the athletic club does, a sprayer that they use, and it's the one that was specified along with the chemicals. And our intent was not to mix chemicals for disinfectant. We want to keep everything consistent and warehouse it so that we could get the economies of scale for saving money. And the specs were written around that so that we could have centralized disinfectant in our warehouse and consistent equipment without having to order different parts whenever these things need repairs.
Thank you, Director. You have the floor, Alderman Massey.
So who did you work with in procurement that did the research?
Director?
Actually, thank you, Mayor. It was a joint effort with all of the procurement staff. I mean, they worked from the director to the assistant director and their staff. So it was a joint effort throughout procurement.
Thank you. Alderman Massey?
And does the city of Germantown then are we acquiring equipment that is like this? And does the Germantown Athletic Club already have equipment that is exactly like this?
Director?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, the athletic club has a handheld that they use to disinfect their equipment. And while the club was closed, this is probably more information than you need. While they were closed, that equipment was used in the police cars and fire trucks and ambulances. And then once the club opened back up, well, then they needed it for themselves.
Thank you, Director. Go ahead, Alderman.
Are these battery run electrostatic sprayers?
Director, what are the specs on the energy use?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, we did order handhelds, which are battery operated, and there is one that is has a cord that plugs into the receptacle.
Thank you, Director. Continue, Alderman.
Well, something that I would recommend is to check the specs from the CDC to see if that positive charge that we're getting from a battery powered unit is sufficient to actually do the type of cleaning that the CDC recommends. It's my understanding that with some of the battery powered units that you don't get the positive charge that's needed for those to attach to the objects that are intended to be cleaned. So my concern is that while we're buying equipment and we're paying people to clean things, that we may not actually be getting the extent of the cleaning that we need. I think, there's possibly some studies that show that the battery powered will clean or produce a positive charge of around 50%, whereas the ones that you would plug into a wall might produce as much as 80%. And, there are different cleaning devices that are out there that do a better job of cleaning. So my only concern is that we're thinking that we're cleaning the objects for our citizens and city employees, and maybe it's not the depth of cleaning that would otherwise be recommended by the CDC. Does Chief Selberg have any insight in those issues?
Thank you, Alderman. Chief Selberg, do you have any thing to add on CDC as it relates to this equipment?
No, sir. I'm afraid I don't have any knowledge of whether the battery operator ones are provide any difference. I know that they've been used extensively, and I'm pretty sure that they would have been certified for that use, but I couldn't tell you the difference between them. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Chief. Director Douglas, anything to add on that as far as the specs on battery versus, I guess, 110 line?
Yes, Mayor. Just to reiterate, the procurement staff, they did a lot of research, extensive research. So I feel confident that what we have specified and what we have ordered will do the job that we need to get done.
Thank you, Director. That concludes your time on the floor. Alderman Massey, further discussion? Any further discussion?
Mayor, if we're going into
Yes,
the second
Alderman
round.
Massey, you are recognized, sir. Go ahead. You have the floor.
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to postpone this vote until our next meeting and give staff time to
Sure. Thank you.
research.
You've made a motion to postpone until the next meeting. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion. I see no reason.
Thank you. There's a motion and a second. Please call the roll.
Mayor, we're going to have discussion.
It's more or less a matter of whether to move this forward to postpone. We understand that you feel that way, and so does Alderman Sanders. Without objection, we'll go for a vote.
Well, Mayor, I'd like to have some discussion.
You have the floor, sir.
So the reason that I'm wanting to postpone this is I want to be certain that if we are saying that we're doing something to protect the citizens of Germantown and to protect the employees, that we've got a product that is absolutely 100% doing what the appearance would have it do. So I would just like somebody to do some research and make sure that this type of cleaning produces the results that are recommended by the CDC. And if not, we revisit this. It could be that this particular vendor can provide the services, but I'm not sure how that would necessarily impact the bidding that was done. But I do think that as a board, we have an obligation to determine whether or not this cleaning does what I think the expectations are of it. So, Mayor, can you ask staff, if this motion does pass, to provide us with that information for the next vote, please?
Thank you. We will. Any further discussion?
Mayor, I'd like to
Yes, Alderman Gibson, you have the floor.
Thank you. Just a comment, because this is an agreement that is to be used on an as-needed basis. The director, Mr. Reynolds, has already said that extensive research was done through procurement, through his department as well. I believe that I'm comfortable moving forward based on that analysis that I'm confident that was done. As far as to Alderman Massey's specific questions,
Please don't use the alderman's name. Go ahead, continue.
I caught it. Thank you. The previous comments about the CDC requirements. Director, do you think that's something that you could easily obtain in this next work week to be able to make sure that is compliant, since, again, this is an as-needed contract? Director
Douglas?
Thank you, Mayor. Just additional information. This contractor has been doing work for Shelby County 911. And so, again, I feel like it's been vetted really good. But to answer the question, we can do some research to find out if the CDC recognizes this equipment and the chemical to be used.
Thank you, Director. You still have the floor, Alderman Gibson.
No, sir, I don't need any more time. Thank you.
Further discussion on the amendment?
Just a comment,
Sanders.
I second the motion just because I don't see any detrimental impact on the city to wait one meeting to reassure us that we do have the right equipment. To be frank with you, I didn't even think about battery versus electric. That's something I didn't even think about. So it raises some questions in my mind that just would like to know that we did look at that and considered it. And I'm for this contract, but I do think it's prudent to assure ourselves and the employees that we have and the public that's can visit our facilities that we've got the right formula here.
Thank you, Alderman Sanders. Further discussion on the amendment? Please
Mayor,
call the roll.
like to,
Yes, Alderman
Mayor,
Sanders, you're recognized.
well,
Alderman
this is
Massey. Alderman Massey, go ahead.
I am for the contract. I would appreciate it if the board would postpone this to get some clarity on the issues that I've raised. Just based on what I know at this point, I would be uncomfortable moving forward with the terms of this contract without the clarity that I've requested. So I would appreciate everyone's support on this.
Thank you, Alderman Sanders. I'm sorry, Alderman Massey. My apologies. I'm looking at one face and talking to your phone number. Any further discussion on this on the amendment?
Sure.
Alderman Owens, go right ahead.
Thanks. I believe also when Director Douglas is telling us that this has been researched by the procurement department, what we're doing, again, as expressed by Alderman Gibson, is on an as-needed basis. I think the information that we are requesting could be provided to us. And if for some reason we decide that it is not effective or not the right use of electric versus battery, then we can look at bidding this out somewhere else. But I think we need to move forward and get started on this for the safety of our employees and our residents.
Thank you, Alderman Owens. Further discussion on the amendment? Please call the roll.
Alderman Sanders.
Yes.
Alderman Gibson.
No.
Alderman Massey.
Yes.
Alderman Owens.
No.
Vice Mayor Yonda.
No.
The amendment fails. We move to the original motion that was properly moved and seconded. Any further discussion on that motion?
I would like to.
Vice Mayor.
Just wanted to say to procurement and Mr. Douglas, and thank you for your research on this, but also, since it is as needed, if you would take next week and just double check that information, because if it's not good, then we won't need it. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Further discussion? Please call the roll.
Alderman Massey.
I'm going to abstain.
Alderman Owens.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Yonda.
Yes.
Alderman Sanders.
Yes.
Alderman Gibson.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion carries and passes. Mr. Douglas, please go out and procure the equipment and get our employees in a safe environment. We've reached the conclusion of our meeting tonight. Thank you so much, board, for participating and supporting administration and the residents of Germantown's work as we move forward. I wish everyone a good night, and we are adjourned. Thank you.